All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning share, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Menachem Av, to thank Benjamin and Elise Wall and Latanya Eretz Yisrael for dedicating Ovid Sherman Joshua this month in honor of Moshe Abramson and Jeremy Lassen, who make the shiurim available to all of those who are outside of our physical base medrash. To thank Jack Bennett for dedicating the shiurim and Joshua this month in memory of Sergeant Nikolai Rappaport of the Givati Brigade, who died in a Hezbollah ambush in southern Lebanon in 1998. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Seid and Sima Haken, for dedicating the Shurim this week in the Schusar of Fushlim for Avram Ben Zinat, and for Aslacha for the entire family, and to Michael and Leah Edidin in memory of Leah's brother, Yonasan Ben Yosef Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamas will have an Aliyah, and the families a nechama. But say with that, let us begin. So today's daf is daf Ayin 70. We are picking up Emir Hashem on the top of Ayin, first line. So the Gemara says as follows. So continuing in the sugya of refuas, of different medicinal remedies. So the Gemara says as follows. L'chazisa. So what's a chazisa? Rashi says over here, yalepes. So we'll say, so yalepes is some type of skin disease, or really boils. Yalepes is ultimately, again, that's moist. So sometimes a moist boil. So the Gemara says, what should you do? Leisi shev chiti arzinaisa. Go ahead and take seven good wheat kernels. V'niklenu, go ahead and burn them, literally roast them. Amora charata, on top of a brand new shovel. So take these 7 wheat kernels, roast them on top of a new shovel. V'nafik mishchaminayu, the oil that comes out of those kernels. V'neshiv, and rub it on the affected area. Okay, that's the remedy. Rav Simi bar Ashi Rav Simi bar Ashi also used this same remedy for a non-Jew who was suffering from saras v'issi, and it worked. So apparently, not only does it work for this chazazis, but also works for leprosy as well. Incredible. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said as follows: Hayman de machuli ba'alunchi de parsoi michya lo chaye. So we'll say, so a person who is injured literally by a Persian sword. By a Persian spear. What's the chap of the Persian spear? If you look at Rashi 3 lines down from the top, Bulanchi parsoi, benun cholio shal parsam shemetzarfen also b'mei sam hamaves. Apparently the Persians used to go ahead and coat their spears. Literally, according to Rashi, it's forge their spears, but coat their spears with some type of poisonous water, Rashi brings down. So in other words, the Persians had this chap, not only were their spears, but Lamai said they coated it with poison. So if you got stabbed by a Persian spear, you were going to die. So the Gemara says over here, Shmuel says, a person who gets stabbed by a Persian spear is going to die. Lo chaye. Adahachi v'hachi. So, but nevertheless, again, while you're dying from the stab of the Persian spear, Nisfule bisra shmeina agmuri v'chamra chaye. So we'll say, so as much as there is no remedy after one has been stabbed by a Persian spear, in other words, unfortunately, one is going to die as a result of the poison, but there is a way to prolong one's life. How do you prolong your life? So the Gemara says, go ahead and eat meat. Fatty meat cooked over coals, the chamra chaye, and undiluted wine. And I will say, now ultimately again, therefore what? Afshar the chaye porta, this will prolong a person's life for a little bit, umafkid abese, and you have the ability to go ahead and command your home, give your family like your final will and testament. So I will say it's a very profound Gemara. So of course, again, remember, all of these Gemaras have layers of profundity. Rabbi will say, what is the Gemara describing over here? The Gemara is describing over here an unchangeable situation. Right? An unchangeable situation. So this individual, in this case over here, has unfortunately been stabbed by a Persian spear. What happens after a person is stabbed by a Persian spear? What happens? they're going to die. There is, bless you, there is no remedy for that poison. So what do you do in life at the end of the day when you are faced with unchangeable circumstances, right? We like to think that you could change any reality, and often we live with the conception that you could change any reality, but every so often we are faced with a reality that I cannot change. So what do you do in those situations? You maximize the reality you have, even if you have an inability to change it. So the Gemara says, a person stabbed with a Persian spear, they're going to die. They're going to die. That's unchangeable. What you can do is potentially eke out an additional few moments of life. And in those few moments of life, potentially go ahead and say the things you need to say to your family. You can't change your circumstances in life. If you can't change, the only option you have is to maximize the circumstances you have in front of you. Such an incredible Musar Haskell. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amravidi bar Avin, similarly, Haiman de Bala Zibura. If a person swallows a bee, mechia lo chaye, a person is not going to survive that. Not going to survive it. So what can you do? We'll say first wide line on Ayin Od Aleph. Adahachi v'hachi, but again, after you swallow the bee, thank you. Say thank you so much. No worries, thank you. Adahachi v'hachi. Adahachi v'hachi means, unfortunately, while a person is dying, nashke revi asad dechala shmeina. Go ahead and drink a revius of strong vinegar. After the chaye porta, you'll be able to live a little bit longer. Umafkid lebese, and you'll be able to go ahead and literally give, final will and testament to your mishpacha. So we'll say same yesod. It's really, and I'll say there is such profundity in these statements of Chazal, recognizing circumstances and situations that you cannot change. So if you can't change the circumstances you have, at least find some way to maximize them. Incredible. We'll say second wide line, Ayin Amud Aleph. Second wide line. Let's go weiter. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Shmuel Silber said, Achal basar shar balefes. If a person ate the meat of an ox with lefes, we'll say lefes, Rashi says, could either mean like a condiment or beets, velan balavana, and then a person slept under the moon. Slept under the moon means a person slept in the outdoors. Beleli yudalit otesvav, either on the 14th or the 15th, pitekufas Tammuz, right? In the season of Tammuz, achzaso achilu. Ultimately, again, they're going to be impacted. They're going to get sick from achilu. Okay, so the Gemara says, so good. Good. Fine. Okay, we'll come back to it. And similarly, again, if a person eats his fill from any item, in other words, eating until you're full, so ultimately, again, achzaso achilu. Ultimately, again, he'll contract achilu. Achzaso achilu literally means this sickness of achilu will take hold of him. Amra papa, afilu mitamri. This is true even if you eat your fill of dates. So the Gemara says, it's actually interesting. I suppose the solution of the Gemara is, if you eat your fill of any food, ultimately, well, again, if you eat ox meat with lefes, with beets, and go ahead, our turnips is actually the better term for it, not beets, right? You eat ox meat with turnips, you sleep outside on the 14th or the 15th in the Tekufa of Tammuz, or you eat your full of any food, even of dates, ultimately, again, you'll get sick with this achilu. So the Gemara says, pshita. Now, I'll say the pshita is, once the Gemara said, if you eat your fill of any food, you're going to get sick with this achilu, then the Gemara says, even dates. So the Gemara says, I don't understand, why would you think that dates are outside of the category of any food? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Tamri, misavan umeshachnon umeshalshalon umeashron v'lomefankon. Dates are a quality food. Why are dates a quality food? Dates have the ability to satiate. Dates are also meshachron, means like they're good for the skin. Meshalshalon, they cause a person to be regular. Ma'ashron, they fortify the system. V'lomefankon, and even though again they're sweet, they do not cause a person to become a mifunak. We'll say a mifunak is like a high maintenance individual. So again, normally a person consumes sweet foods, maybe that makes them a high maintenance individual. Dates are not like that. So I would have thought that since dates have all of these qualities Emolo, perhaps again, if you eat to the point of satiety, you wouldn't contract achilu. Kamashmala, no, you'll still get achilu. Says Gemara, by the way, my achilu. What is achilu? On Rabbi Lazar, ish shal atzamos, some type of fire of the bones. My ish shal atzamos. What is ish shal atzamos? Amrabaye ish garmi, bone fire. Okay, so it's very helpful. Right, so again, what's interesting is what is this? You know what it sounds like? It sounds like some type of joint pain, right? So fire of the bones sounds like some type of internal joint pain. Okay, so the Gemara said, Maya Suse, what is the remedy for achilu? Amra Abaye said, Amrili aim, my mother told me, Kulu shakaini tlasa v'shiva utresar. So Rabbi says, it's actually interesting. Before the Gemara gets into what the remedy is, the Gemara says, in general, Abaye says, my mother, Abaye says, my mother told me, normally when consuming remedies, right? Let's say you have a particular drink that's a particular remedy. Normally these drinks have to be consumed for either 3 days, 7 days, or 12 days. Thank you so much. V'hai ademasi. This remedy, you continue drinking it until you are totally healed. Now, we don't know what the remedy is yet, but Abaye is just saying, my mother told me this remedy is different, that you have to continue consuming it until you're healed. Kulu shakaini ali barekana. Normally, again, when consuming remedies, you normally consume remedies on an empty stomach. V'hai basar da'achal v'shasi v'ayala beis hakisei v'nafek u'mashe yadei. But this remedy really you should only consume after you eat, after you drink, after you come out of the bathroom, and go ahead and wash your hands. Okay? Umaisi lebuna dishasisa. So I'll say, so what is the remedy? So here we go. So the Gemara says, you go ahead, here, let me look at Rashi. So you go ahead, take a buna dishasisa de talfachi. If you look at Rashi, I'll say, just Rashi is right opposite the first wide line of the Gemara. So what do you take? Buna dishasisa talfachi, mali egrof, min shasisa. Shem machal ha'asui mikemach adashu melach. So we'll say the first ingredient is you take a fistful of shasisa. Now, what is shasisa? Shasisa is a cooked dish that is made from flour, lentils, and salt. So you take a fistful of shasisa, ubuna dechamra atika, and a fistful of old wine, binagbalinu bahadi adadi, and you mix them together. And you eat it. Apparently, again, that's the remedy for achilu. Okay? The nichroch, so actually when I finish, the nichroch b'sadine, and ultimately, again, I will say, so that's step one. So we'll say, person is suffering from achilu. So how do you go ahead? What's the remedy for achilu? So number one, take a mixture, a fistful of shesisa, a fistful of old wine, go ahead and mix it together, consume it. After that, what do? V'nichroch b'sadine, wrap yourself in covers. V'nigne, and go to sleep. V'leka dinukme adekaymen afshe. Well, listen to this. And no one should wake you up. You should get up on your own. Can you imagine that, right? Going to sleep, getting up on your own. No one or nothing waking you. Adekaymen afshe. And when you wake up in the morning, take off your covers. In other words, you have to remove those covers. If you don't remove those covers, ultimately, again, you'll contract the achilu again. Apparently, I will say from the Gemara's perspective, the disease itself goes to the cover. Essentially, what you're doing, by the way, is actually interesting. Rashi points this out. Rashi says, "V'nichroch gufei b'sadine k'di shiyischemim gufo v'yazia." What's the idea of wrapping yourself in the blanket? To sweat. You're sweating out the cold, which is interesting, or whatever. You're sweating out the illness. So the idea from the perspective of the Gemara is, when you get up, remove the cover. If you don't remove the cover, you contract the illness again. Okay, fascinating. Amrli Eliyahu Rab Nosson. So I will say, Eliyahu Navi said to Rab Nosson. Listen to this, I will say, this is incredible. Echol shlish. When you're eating, eat to 1/3 of your fill, drink 1/3 of your fill, and then leave 1/3 empty. Why? Ta'amid amiluach. This way, when you get angry, ultimately, again, you'll be satiated. What's the pshat? Take a look at Rashi again. Rashi says, "V'imali bitnecha," and your stomach becomes full. V'imali bitnecha kas tamod amiluach. Aval im timali me'acha achilu shtia l'chishetikos tikva. So I will say, so this is fascinating Gemara on a variety of levels. First of all, apparently I will say anger has an almost satiating ability or satiating quality, which I will say, we know this from any time that we've gotten angry. When you get angry, you forget your other physical needs, right? Anger is such a powerful emotion. If you were hungry beforehand, you forgot about it. You were thirsty beforehand, you forgot about it. You were tired, you forgot about it. Whatever it is, and I will say it's actually interesting, anger often comes with a rush of adrenaline, right? It's not a good adrenaline, but it's adrenaline nevertheless. So I'll say, which is an incredible yisod. So the Gemara says, so if Yo said Rabbi Nassan, when you're eating, essentially always leave room for anger, right? Because Lamaisa, if you get angry on a full stomach, it's not healthy. Anger in general isn't healthy. Getting angry on a full stomach is not healthy. I will say, what's dramatic about this Gemara? I mean, there's a lot that's dramatic about this Gemara, but it's also fascinating is Elio seems to be telling Rabbi Nassan a person should plan to get angry. Anger, kaas, is one of the most destructive character traits, right? The Rambam brings down that kaas, anger, is perhaps the most destructive character trait. The Rambam brings down in Hilchos Deos. So what should a person do? I've mentioned this many times. So what should a person do if ultimately, again, they have a problem with anger and they keep on getting angry? The Rambam writes, stop getting angry. Right? That's Maimonidean wisdom, which is, I will say, incredibly profound, because what the Rambam is saying is, you have a problem with your temper, a problem with anger, you're in control. You're in control, right? Stop getting angry. Lamais, at the end of the day, don't pretend like other people are in charge of whether or not you get angry. Getting angry, ultimately, again, is a fundamental decision each of us makes. So it's incredible. But what Elio is saying to Rabbi Nassan is, it appears that anger, for many of us, unfortunately, is an inescapable reality. I hate saying that phrase, but not inescapable because I can't escape it. Inescapable because I choose not to escape it. I choose to allow myself to get angry. Eliyahu therefore says to Rabbi Nassan, take proper measures so at least anger won't have a more deleterious effect, because getting angry on a full stomach apparently is harmful to your health. Incredible. If a person wants to make sure that they don't come to any kind of intestinal illness, stomach illness, what should you do? Make sure to go ahead and dip your food, both during the winter and the summer, right? Rabbi say this is incredible. And your su'udah, when you sit down to go ahead and eat, so literally again, withdraw your hands from it, which means what Rashi says, Shelo tamali es kreisecha. So apparently, again, Rabbi say there is a wisdom to not eating to your fill, right? Go ahead and essentially stop eating a little bit before you are satiated. So I will say, just the Sfarim bring down, there's a lot of commentary on this in general, that what the Gemara is saying over here is that the key to health in life, now the Gemara is talking about physical health, but it could very well be that this is the key to spiritual health as well, is don't fully indulge all of your physical senses. In other words, enjoy, but perhaps, again, don't enjoy to the point of physical satiety, but rather hold back just a little. This way, a person doesn't fully indulge the physical part of their persona, the physical part of their life. It's actually incredible. Sudascha shana ascha mimena, the su'udah from which you get hana, mishoch yadcha mimena. Pull back your hand just a little bit. Don't fully indulge. Hold back just a little bit. If you have to go to the bathroom, don't hold back. Don't hold back. Also, we've seen this a number of times throughout our journeys of Shas, how Chazal understood that physical health really depends on relieving yourself whenever you have to use the bathroom. Amar Mar Okva, Haiman deshasi tila chivra, achzasu visik. So we'll say the Gemara says, Mar Okva says, this person who eats tila chivra, or drinks tila chivra, Rashi says, is bad wine. Bad wine, right? Yain ra. If you drink bad wine, it's bad for your health. Ultimately, again, you'll be overtaken by visik. I will say, what's visik? Rashi says is chaloshos, weakness. So apparently, consumption of bad wine ultimately leads to physical weakness. Amrav Chista, shisin mine chamra havu malya dekulu samcha rechasna. So Rav Chista said there are 60 different types of wine that are all very good for your health. The kamdenamnir amongst all of these wines is sumka, they're red wine, and rechasna, they have a good aroma, a good smell. Griya dekulhu tilachivra, the worst kind of wine for you, say, is this weak wine. Tilachivra could also mean like a white wine, right? A weaker wine. Okay, so this Rashi calls it yain ra, bad wine. Amar Yehuda, Hayman di Yosef betziparne nisan gabinura. So I'll say if a person sits in the mornings, right? In the mornings of Nisan by the fire, v'shayif mishcha, and rubs himself with oil, v'nafik v'yosef b'shimsha, and then he goes out and sits in the sun, achzaso visik, right? Will be seized literally again by this physical weakness. Now, both say what he seems to be describing over here also is potential like overheating. Remember again, Yomi Nisan, remember again already is the morning. So remember again, he's sitting in the mornings of Nisan by the fire, then putting oil on himself, and then sitting out in the sun. So there's a sense of overheating. So if he's going to be overheating, ultimately again, he could be seized by this visik, by this weakness. Tan Rabbanan, hikis dam v'shimish mitaso. If a person did bloodletting and then engaged in relations, havilo banim viskin, he'll have weak children. And I will say, this is now part, we've seen this motif in Chazal, that ultimately again, that both the physical and spiritual state that a person is in at the time of marital intimacy could have an impact on the children that are conceived from that act of intimacy. So a person does bloodletting, which again, I both say normally weakens a person, right? And then has relations, could have children who are weak. Hikizu shneim, if both husband and wife both did bloodletting, v'shimshu, and had relations again after that act of bloodletting, so havile banim ba'alei ra'asan. Ultimately, again, I will say, so ra'asan, Rashi says, is chaloshim harbe, is a very weakened state, machmas sheish lahen sheretz b'moach. As a result, I'll say Rason is some type of parasite inside of the head. So a person, so both husband and wife both engaged in bloodletting, then halacha l'maisa, again, the Gemara says, to have children who are in an incredibly weakened state. Okay? This is only if you didn't eat something after bloodletting. Aval time midi, but if you ate something after bloodletting, less lanba, then ultimately we're not concerned with any type of weakened state. If a person came back from a journey, from traveling, and then had relations, ultimately the Gemara says they're going to have children who are very weak. Once again, Abba says the same idea. Coming back from a journey, the assumption is that a person is already in a weakened state. So if relations occur in a weakened state, the children will suffer from this type of chronic weakness. Person comes out of the bathroom, they should not have relations after using the bathroom until they wait the amount of time of half a mil. So let's remember again, takes a mil is 18 minutes. So half a mil is 9 minutes. After using the bathroom, wait these 9 minutes before having relations. Mipnei, Rabbi say, this is actually why. Mipnei sheshed beis hakisim alave imo. So Rabbi say, hearkening back to our shadim discussions of Shabbos and Sunday, right, our Karidaikos discussions. So remember again, there's an issue with, we saw this actually in Maseches Brachos, that shadim often inhabited beis hakisei, bathrooms. I also remember again, why was that? Because remember again, their beis hakisei, their bathrooms were often in uninhabited, desolate areas, which are prime shadim locations. So there was a concern that ultimately after using the beis hakisei, a person would be, I don't know, somehow impacted or yes, would have shadim with them. So engaging in relations after that could ultimately be a bit deleterious to one's health. Vim shimesh, and if one does so, havile bana nichbin, he'll have children who are nichbin. And I will say, now what's a nichbin? So Rashi says over here, noflim machmas choli. They fall down as a result of illness. So I will say it's actually interesting because many of the contemporary commentaries I actually define this as epilepsy. As he's talking about falling down as a result of seizures. Okay, so the Gemara says, if a person has relations standing up, now I will say, interestingly enough, I will say, are cramps. Now, interesting enough, the Gemara just seems to be saying perhaps this is just a physical reality. Person has relations while standing up, ultimately again they could get cramps. Miyushav, person has relations sitting down. Ochzaso deleria. Ultimately, again, they could suffer from deleria. Himilamala vahu milamata. If the wife is on top and the husband is on the bottom, ochzaso deleria. My deleria. Rabbi Shmuel ben Levi. Some deleria. Darda. So we'll say, see, here's what's interesting. Once again, the Gemara doesn't define what this deleria is. That sounds like delirium. Okay, I don't know if it literally. Hey, but instead, what the Gemara does is the Gemara talks about the remedy for deleria. What's the sign for deleria? Darda. Right? What do you take for deleria? Darda. Okay. My dardara. What is dardara? Says the Gemara. Amrabaye moriki dechuchi. It is morika is saffron, but dafka saffron that grows by thorns. Rashi says moriki dechuchi. Kurik hagadol begeder shel hizmi shikorin shvil. So it's dafka saffron plant that grows by thorns. Okay. Rapapa alis ubalale. Rapapa, when he would take saffron, would often go ahead and chew it and then spit it out. So he would chew it and then spit it out. Chew it and then swallow it. Rav Papi alis v'shadili. Rav Papi would chew it and spit it out. Okay, so apparently different ways to use the saffron. Fine. Amra Abaye. So Abaye is supposed to say, it's such an incredible Gemara. Misha ena baki b'derech eretz. And I will say, now what does this mean? A person who's not a baki b'derech eretz is not talking about a guy who has a problem with his midos, but rather is talking about a man who is impotent. Right? So I will say, what the Gemara is talking about over here is a man suffering from ED, right? A person who is impotent. So we'll say this is incredible. So what is the cure for impotence? So the Gemara says, Laisi gimel kafizi kurtimi dechuchi. So we'll say, go ahead and literally again take 3 kafizim. This is Rashi says, kli machzik gimel revios. So we'll say, so a kafiza apparently itself is a utensil that holds 3 reviuses. So take 3 kafizim of kurtami. Remember again, kurtami dechuchi, which is saffron that grows by the thorns. Vinedukinu vinishkalinhu bechamra. So we'll say, so what should you do? Grind up the saffron, boil it in wine. Take this concoction, vinishti, and drink it. So I'm saying this was the Talmudic cure for impotence. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, hein, hechzirun lina'arosai. So Rabbi Yochanan says, well, this is incredible. It's like a testimonial. Rabbi Yochanan says, I took this, and it restored me back to my youthful vigor. I will say, is that not incredible? So again, I will say, again, what's fascinating about this Gemara is a number of things. First of all, I will say, isn't it fascinating that like Rabbi Yochanan goes on record about this, right? So Rabbi Yochanan tells us, I had this issue of impotence, and Lamaisa, I took this concoction, and Baruch Hashem, it worked. We'll say it's also such a beautiful. There's a beauty to the Gemara, because what the Gemara says is that like there are certain things that are natural in life, certain things that occur, and a person should never go ahead and chas v'shalom be embarrassed because of the natural events that happen, especially those associated with aging. Right? There are certain, there's a tshuva by Rav Moshe. The halacha is that when a woman is in nida, so the halacha is she's not supposed. We did this in Smichas Chaver not so long ago. So husband and wife are not supposed to hand things directly to each other. So there's a tshuva by Rav Moshe where it talks about a chassan and kala by Sheva brachas, where there was going to be an issue by Avdallah. I don't remember the circumstance, but whatever it was, is that the shaila was the kala chassan were going to be embarrassed if they can't hand like Havdalah directly to each other. So Rav Moshe said, what is there to be embarrassed about that a woman is in nida? right? If a woman is in nida, that means that Baruch Hashem, her body is functioning and is working in the way it is supposed to be. He said, Rav Moshe says, the fact that people are nosy, they should just mind their own business. But Lamai said, there's no embarrassment attached to normal bodily things. And I both say that's part of what the Gemara is putting out over here also, that sometimes people are reticent to go ahead and seek out help for certain physical issues because they're embarrassed about it. So I really do think that Rabbi Yochanan comes on record over here and says, by the way, I had this problem, and Baruch Hashem, this concoction returned me back to my youthful vigor. They both say, why does the Gemara need to say this? Why does Rabbi Yochanan need to go on record? They both say it's a chizik, because sometimes people are reticent to get help for certain things that are normal physical realities of aging, and not getting help for it could cause issues within a relationship, could cause issues in shalom bayis. Person should never be embarrassed about things that are normal physical realities of life. Incredible Gemara. We'll say, Mamish, everything is in Shas. Everything is in Shas. And we'll say, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Shlosha Devarim machishim kocho shel adam. There are three things that diminish the koach, the physical vigor of a person. The eluhain. These are the three things. Pachad. Rabbi say, what's interesting, it's actually an incredible Gemara. Rabbi say, pachad normally means fear. Here, if you notice, Rashi translates it differently. Rashi says, pachad is daiga, worry. Shedoig al davar ha'asid kigon tirud bizonos o pachad oyev. So Rabbi say, this is fascinating. So pachad here doesn't just mean fear. Rashi says it means worry about something in the future. Let's say, isn't this incredible? Worrying about the future, worrying about something that may occur. So pachad, derech, traveling, va'avon, and sin. Let's say, it's such a profound Gemara. Three things ultimately sap a person of his koach. So I will say, worrying about the future. Worrying about the future. What's the chap with worrying about the future? So we'll say worrying about the future, ultimately, again, you can't control it. And there's absolutely, there are any untold number of variables that could unfold in our future. And we know that if a person becomes preoccupied with worrying about what will be, well, see, you know what happens? That people are perpetually worrying about the future. It leads to life paralysis. You end up not doing anything, not accomplishing anything, because you are simply frozen and paralyzed by the future, by the worry of the unknown. Derech, so we'll say that one just seems to be a reality of travel, right? Constantly traveling and not being settled in one place saps a person of their vitality. And sin, we'll say, is an incredible one, right? So we'll say sometimes if you think about it, the greatest negative byproduct of chait is not simply the commission of Aveira, but it's the fact that I'm utilizing precious life koach in the wrong way. Right? I say each of us has there is a set amount, there's a reservoir of life, vitality, and strength that you have. It's not infinite, right? It's not constantly renewable. There's just like time is a finite, non-renewable resource, so koach is also a finite, non-renewable resource. And if I use it in the wrong way, if I use it for chait, then ultimately, again, that means it is not available for something else. It's an incredible, incredible idea. So we'll say these three things ultimately diminish the koach of a person. Dichsiv, so the Gemara says, pachad dichsiv, libi secharchar azavani kochi, derech dichsiv, ana b'derech kochi, avon dichsiv, kashal ba'avoni kochi. So we'll say, you see each of these three things have psukim that indicate that they sap a person of their vitality. But I will say, but in general, the Gemara is teaching us is this incredible yisod. Understand that there are certain things which use up your life koach. Worrying about the future, constantly worrying about some potential unknown will sap you of your koach. I will say, derech, what does derech mean? But there are people who are always like running around like a chicken without a head, right? They're running in like multiple directions in any given moment. That saps a person of vitality. Choose a derech, choose a path and go down it. And lastly, chait. A person chooses to utilize their life of vitality in the commission of sin. Not only am I making poor choices, but I'm also using up my life koach that could have been used for a dynamic activity is now unfortunately again being squandered for the pursuit of sin. It's so profound. Shlosha devarim matizin gufo shel adam. Both say there are ultimately again three things. Matizin. Matizin gufo shel adam. They're all ultimately both say now matizin literally means, Rashi says, means tear down. Rashi says over here, matizin gufo shel adam, literally deconstruct the body of a person. What are they? Ve'eluhein achal me'umad, eating standing up, shasa me'umad, drinking standing up. So apparently what that means is these are unhealthy behaviors. So eating standing up, drinking standing up, shimesh mitaso me'umad, relations standing up. Chamisha krovin lemisa yosem min hachayim. There are 5 things Rabbi say that are so unhealthy that they put you in a state where you are closer to death than life. Ve'eluhein achal va'amad. So Rabbi say this is a person eats and immediately stands up. Shasa va'amad, a person drinks and immediately stands up. Hikiz dam va'amad, you bloodlet and immediately stand up. Yashan va'amad, you're sleeping and then you immediately stand up. So I'll say, if you notice again, these are quick changes of state, right? So eat, stand up, right? So apparently again, doing these things immediately imperils a person's health. All right? Shimesh mitasa va'amad, has relations and immediately stands up afterwards. Shisha, ha'osa osa miyad mes. Wow. Both say there are 6 things that if you do it, you're going to die immediately. Now both say, well, what this really means is 6 things, if you do all of them, again, it puts a person in such a perilous health situation that chasrom they could die immediately. Ve'eluhein, these are the 6 things. Number 1, haba min haderech v'nisyageya. So we'll say a person comes back from a journey and is tired. And we'll say, okay, and then you're doing all these things. Hikiz dam, then you bloodlet. V'nichnas lebeis hamerchatz, then you go into the shvitz, right? You go into the sauna, you go into the bathhouse. V'shasa, and then you drink. V'nistaker, and then you become inebriated. V'yashin agabe karka, and then you sleep on the ground. V'shimish mitasa, and then you have relations. So if you do all of these things, right? All of these things, ultimately, you can notice again, what's the common denominator? It's a lot of exertion. It's just a lot of exertion. So if you do all of these things, chas v'shalom, again, a person could die. Am Rabbi Yochanan v'hu sha'asan kisidran. But you only die if you do it in this order. Right? Dafka this order. Okay. Am Rabbaye kisidran meis, shalo kisidran chalish. Abaye says, by the way, if you do it in this order, person can chas v'shalom die. If you don't do it in this order, you're not going to die, but you will be significantly weakened. Ini, is that so? V'hamu'uras avdele la'avda tlas minay omes. But we'll say there was this lady Mu'uras, and Mu'uras did 3, in other words, her Eved did only 3 of these things, and he died. See again, even 3 of these things could imperil your life. To which the Gemara says, that Eved, he was very weak to begin with, right? He was very weak to begin with, so because he was in a compromised state, therefore 3 things ultimately sent him over the edge. Okay, Shmona, so we'll say there are 8 things, Ruban Kashum Yutan Yafef. We'll say there are 8 things where a lot of it is detrimental, but a little of it is actually beneficial. Ve'eluhein, right? Derech, traveling, right? Traveling, and we'll say, Rashi says, the halik bidrachim. Ultimately, again, a little bit of travel is a good thing. Too much travel, ultimately, it could be physically depleting. Derech eretz, relations. So we'll say, by the way, there's a lot of profundity in this Gemara as well, because if you'll notice, by the way, look at the rest. Osher, wealth, right? Malacha, work. So I'll say, even before we write yayin, wine, shina, sleep, chamin. They will say chamin. Rashi brings down is drinking warm items and washing yourself in warm water. Va'kazas dam, and bloodletting. Then I will say, now if you know, there's a lot of stuff in this list. If you notice, okay, so some of them, so if you take bloodletting, right? So bloodletting, what does the Gemara say? A little bit of bloodletting could be very beneficial. A lot of bloodletting could be detrimental. But I will say, if you look at other things in this list, there's also a very strong spiritual message as well. What the Gemara is talking about is a message of moderation. There are certain things that could be very wonderful and very helpful and very healthy in moderation, but in excess, ultimately, again, in excess can be detrimental. So, for example, derech, traveling. Traveling can be something very nice. Let's say if a person's life becomes about traveling, ultimately, again, that can be detrimental to one's personalistic accomplishment, right? Intimacy. Intimacy, again, in moderation can be very healthy and very wonderful in a relationship. But again, an overabundance or an overindulgence ultimately could lead a person to become just a very lustful individual. Osher, wealth. So wealth in moderation, I will say, by the way, moderation doesn't even necessarily have to mean the amount of money you have, but rather it can mean moderation in the pursuit of wealth. The pursuit of wealth, the pursuit of material success could be something that is very healthy and very good, but ultimately, again, constant pursuit of wealth could be something that chas v'shalom is detrimental. Oh, internet. Okay. Good. Right, malacha, work. So we'll say all of these things ultimately, again, so you see this combination. You see this combination ultimately of things, of certain things that are physically detrimental if there's overindulgence versus things that can be spiritually detrimental in a sense of overindulgence. Okay, just fascinating. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. Shmona mematim es hazera. We'll say there are eight things, which literally will say, memait zera means decrease semen. So we'll say this could either mean literally decrease semen, or it could also mean decrease sperm count. In other words, eight things which ultimately, again, Chazal felt were detrimental, ultimately, again, to a man's fertility. Here are the things that are detrimental. Melach, salt. Ra'av, not eating properly, right? Literally, again, famine or starvation. Nesek, which again is some type of blemish. Bichia, ultimately again is crying. So good. So bichia, shina al garbe karka, sleeping on the ground. Gordonius, coriander. Kishus shelo bismana, hops that are not in season or not during the season. V'akozas dam lemata kiflayim. And I will say, bloodletting below, we'll see what below means in just a moment, is doubly detrimental. Okay? So, Kishem Shekash, the Gemara says, Tana, Kishem Shekasha lemata kiflayim, kach yafe lemala kiflayim. The same way that ultimately, again, bloodletting below is doubly detrimental for one's fertility, bloodletting above is doubly beneficial. So the Gemara says, Amra Papa, Shabbat will say, Amid Beis, Kiflai. So Lamata, what does it mean, bloodletting Lamata? Lamata min abeitzim. It means, Rabbi say, so bloodletting essentially below the testicles. Rabbi say, it doesn't mean on this. In other words, bloodletting essentially from the thighs and below. So bloodletting from the parts of your body, from the thighs and below, apparently is doubly detrimental. Lemala min abeitzim, and apparently again, lemaisa bloodletting above the beitzim was doubly beneficial. Okay, the kisha shlo bizmana, eating hops not in their appointed time, ultimately again is beneficial. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, kash shlo is detrimental. So Tana kashem shekasha shlo bizmana kach yafe bizmana. So we'll say the same way eating hops not in their time is detrimental. So ultimately, again, eating hops at the right time is beneficial. Rapapa says, Zmana Tammuz. The time ultimately, again, the time where hops are in season is Tammuz. Shelo Bizmana is Teves. Out of season is Teves. Okay? Yomi Nisan Yomi Tishrei. Lo Ma'alav Lo Kashu. Eating hops during Tishrei and during Nisan is not beneficial or not detrimental. Parav. All right, so we'll say that's the end. That's the end. that is it. So we'll say, so now back to Gittin. It was a good run. We've learned anything and everything about Talmudic medicinal healing, or Ketera again. I should say, medicinal healing of the time of the Gemara. Then I will say back to Gittin. Amr, kiss we get daikos. So remember again, going back to the first Mishnah in the Masechta, thank you. So back to the first Mishnah in the Masechta. So remember again, what did the Mishnah say? If a man said to his wife, or a man said to a group of people, write a get for my wife. Write a get for my wife. And I will say, after issuing that statement, he says, afterwards, again, he is seized by karidaikos. So what's talacha? Then in a state of karidaikos, he goes ahead and says, do not write the get. Ein dvarav ha'achronim klum. His second statement is meaningless. They will say, now remember again, why is his second statement meaningless? Why? Because it was said in a state of karidaikos. And since in a state of karidaikos, the assumption is that a person lacks capacity, therefore the second statement is meaningless. So we'll say, so therefore in this case over here, he said, write a get for my wife while he was of sound mind, and then he canceled the directive while in the state of karidaikos. So the Gemara says that second statement issued during the state of karidaikos is irrelevant. Amr Shem Lakish says, Lakish said, Kosvin v'nosin get la'akos. So we'll say, now here's the interesting shaila. So the shaila comes like this. We'll say, let's play this out. So Ruvain says to a group of people, write a get for my wife. Write a get for my wife. Okay, they hear it. After they receive the directive, he contracts karidaikos. Okay? And now we'll say, in the state of karidaikos, he says, don't write the get. So the Gemara says, what's the status of his statement? What's the status of the get? What's the status of the get? It's on, right? It's on. Write the get. We'll say, the shaila is now, when should we write the get? So Amr Shimon Lakish says, Kosim v'nosning get la'alter. We continue. In other words, we'll say, we literally write and deliver the get immediately. Now, we'll say, what Rish Lakish is saying is like this. Even though right now, as we're writing the get, what is Ruvain the husband doing? What is Ruvain the husband doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? He's saying, don't write it, don't write it, don't write it. Right? He's suffering from karidaikos, telling us not to write the get. Reish Lakish says, we continue the process, right? We continue writing the get because, again, whatever he says during karidaikos is absolutely and wholly irrelevant. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. In kosin ella kasheyishtafa. Rabbi Yochanan says, listen, we're not negating the get, but we're also going to wait to write it until he becomes healthy again. In other words, what we do, Rabbi say, is we pause the process until Ruvain is healthy. That's what we're going to do. We're going to pause until Ruvain is healthy. So my time with Reish Lakish. So I will say, so this is the fundamental machlokes. So my time with Reish Lakish. What's Reish Lakish's logic? Diktani ein bidvar machronim klum. So I will say, Reish Lakish says, look, once you say in the Mishnah that whatever he says during karidaikos is irrelevant, then I will say, then what should we do? Continue the process. And as Reish Lakish says, there's no reason to pause. Meaning, at the end of the day, halacha l'maisa, whatever he says during karidaikos is absolutely wholly irrelevant, and therefore halacha l'maisa continue on. Rabbi Yochanan amar lecha ein b'dvar v'amachronim klum d'lechi misso lo tzarich l'mehader amluchei bei. Rabbi Yochanan says when we say that what he says during karidaikos is irrelevant, what that means, I will say, is when he is healed, there is no reason to go ahead and ask him again, do you still want to give the get? Right? But however, but at the end of the day, we don't write it until he's healed. So I will say, so here's what's interesting. So really, it's fascinating. So according to Reish Lakish, Ruvain, our husband, is suffering from karidaikos, is saying, don't write the get, don't write the get, don't write the get. Reish Lakish says, continue on with the process. Since his words are irrelevant, there's no reason to pause the process, keep going. Rabbi Yochanan says, when we say that his words uttered during karidaikos don't have an effect, that means once he's healed, we don't have to ask him again, do you still want us to continue? But lamaisa, you have to pause the process until he's of sound mind. So, what are they arguing about? Reish Lakish mandame liyashen. So I will say, Reish Lakish says a guy suffering from karidaikos is the same thing as a person who's sleeping. Same as a person who's sleeping. So I will say, so imagine the following situation. Imagine Ruvain says to two people, write a get for my wife, and then he goes to sleep. The Reish Lakish says, do you have to wait until he wakes up in order to write the get? Of course not. What do you do? Continue on. So karidaikos is just like someone who's sleeping. Rabbi Yochanan Madam Shota. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. Karidaikos is not like sleeping. Karidaikos is like a shota. And I will say, same thing by a shota. By a shota, we would say, let's wait until he's of sound mind before we go ahead and we give the get. Rabbi Yochanan Madam Yashin. Why does Rabbi Yochanan compare karidaikos to sleeping? So Yashin l'mechuser maisa. Because we will say sleeping is not missing a maisa. In other words, we will say for karidaikos, we need a process in order to heal him. Yashin, there's no process. To which the Gemara says, Shlakish nami nedami the shota. Why doesn't Reish Lakish compare karidaikos to a shota? So here's the difference. Shota lo samya biyadon. ultimately, I will say, by a shota, there's no cure for being a shota. I will say, many of us recognize this from our encounters throughout the day, right? There is no cure for foolishness, right? No cure for foolishness. There's no cure for shtos. But hi, samya biadan. But ultimately, and I will say, for karidaikos, remember again, there is a remedy. I will say, what's the remedy for karidaikos? Bisra sumka agmuri v'chamra marka. I will say, remember again, the cure for karidaikos, the best Talmudic cure, fatty meat roasted over coals with undiluted wine. But did Rabbi Yochanan actually say this? Right? Did Rabbi Yochanan actually take this position? So the Gemara says, after all, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Shachat bo shnayim o rov shnayim. But say, listen to this. If a man chas v'shalom had a situation where the two simon, I will say his esophagus and windpipe were both fully cut, or the majority of them were cut. V'amar kisvu get leishti, and such a person was able to say, write a get for my wife. Hare elu yichtavu v'yitnu. We'll say the halacha is you write it and you give it. You write it and you give it. The Tanya, and we'll say we learned. So we'll say now what's fascinating about that case. What's fascinating about that case is for Tanya we learned Ra'u Maguyad. We'll say if a person was literally cut up into pieces, Ot Salav Alatzliva, or hanging on the gallows, the Ramaz, and he motioned, and Va'amar Kisvu get leishti, and he said, write a get from my wife. Hare elu yichtavu v'yitnu. Ultimately, again, you have to go ahead and you give a get, right? You write it and you give the get. Shabbos say. So now remember again, what's interesting over here is as follows. These are cases where a person is actively dying. And yet the halacha is, if they say give a get, ultimately, again, we have them give a get. Now, I will say, Bipashos, the reason why the Gemara is asking on Rabbi Yochanan is, Rabbi Yochanan was the one who said that when a person is not in a sound mental state, we pause the process. I will say, Bipashos, in these situations where people are dying, one can make the argument that perhaps they're not in a sound mental state. Yet, halacha l'maaseh, Rabbi Yochanan is on record as saying, give the get. So I will say, so it seems to be a kasha. Hachi hashta hasam daitet selusahi. But say in these cases, Rabbi Yochanan will say, these people have absolutely solid intent. Right? The issue over here is not about intent. The intent, right? Their das is intact. I will say, what's not intact? Their physicality. Right? They're in a weakened state. But Lamai said their das is absolutely intact. Hacha daita shegishtahi. Both say in the case of the karidaikos, literally again their das is compromised. So we'll say it's actually interesting. So Yochanan will say in the cases where the guy is dying, just because the guy is dying, that doesn't mean his das is not solid. So we assume the das is solid, but lamaisa again is the physicality that is waning, as opposed to the karidaikos case, the das is not intact. We'll say, did Shmuel actually say this? The Shmuel, right? Rashi says, Umiyamar Shmuel, Shachap Oshnaim Kosin get leishto, Alma get mechaimu. Now we'll say, so fine. So now we'll say, now the Gemara is totally switching gears. What we're switching gears, we'll say, is this case of the guy who has his windpipe and his esophagus cut, right? So he's actively dying, and you don't recover from that, we'll say. So now Shmuel is on record as saying, you could write a get for such an individual who tells us yet the Shmuel actually say this. So I will say, so the Gemara says, the Shmuel actually says, so I will say, by the way, I'll just pause just a second. What about so we're veering off now the Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. So I will say, so remember again, going back for just a second, and here's what everybody agrees with. If the husband is of sound mind and he says, Kisu get lishti, right, again, give it to my wife. And then what happens? He's seized by karidaikos. And he says, don't write the get. Everyone agrees that what? That Allah Lamaisa, we ignore the second statement and we go forward with the get. The shaila is, do we go forward with the get now, even while he's in this state of karidaikos, saying don't write the get, or do we wait? Machlokes Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish says continue on. Rabbi Yochanan says pause. Rabbi say the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yochanan. That as much as that which he says during karidaikos, we don't listen to. However, halacha lamaisa, we will pause the process until husband recovers from his karidaikos, and then continue on in the get. And when he recovers, we don't have to go back and say, "Padre, do you still want us to do the get?" We'll do the get, but Allah Lamaisa will wait until he recovers from his cardiac. I suppose we'll stop over for today. We'll pick up with the case again tomorrow of Shacha Boshtayim or Roshtayim. Oseh Shkoyach. So perfect.